On behalf of the Securities and Exchange Commission Historical Society, I'd like to welcome everyone to the 12th Annual Morgan Lewis Presents program and thank our esteemed panelists for your time and participation today. My name is Jane Cobb, and I'm Executive Director of the SEC Historical Society. The Society is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're not affiliated or funded by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission or any other government entity. We depend on the kind support of individuals and organizations like Morgan Lewis to carry out our mission to preserve and make available the history of the regulation, oversight, and enforcement of our securities markets. You'll find the entire series of Morgan Lewis Presents programs in our ever-growing collection of galleries, oral histories, unique papers, photos, and hundreds of other historical items in our collection at sechistorical.org. I'm particularly excited about today's program because we have just embarked on a project to curate a gallery on the history of the SEC's regional offices. And this will be a great jumpstart to that endeavor. I'm pleased now to introduce Tim Burke. Tim is a partner at Morgan Lewis and head of the firm's Securities Enforcement and Litigation practice. He is also a member of the Society's Board of Trustees, where he has served as a member of our museum committee for nearly 6 years. I want to thank Tim and Morgan Lewis for their long-standing and generous support of the Society. Thank you again, Tim, and with that, I'll turn the program over to you.
Well, thank you, Jane. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. As Jane said, I'm Tim Burke, and I head the Securities Enforcement and Litigation Group at Morgan Lewis. And Morgan Lewis is once again proud to serve as sponsor of the SEC Historical Society's Virtual Museum and the Morgan Lewis Presents program. As Jane said, this is the 12th year of sponsorship of the program, and this year's program, like the prior ones, will be permanently housed in the SEC's Historical Society Virtual Museum so that museum visitors and researchers can hear its content for years to come. Well, today is the first time we're doing this presentation entirely virtually. All our panelists are in different places. All of our audience participants are in different places. And I'm also very pleased to say that it's the largest audience we've had in the 12-year history of this program, with more than 675 registered guests. As Neil alluded to at the beginning, today's program will be for CLE credit in 9 states that are listed in the program introduction materials, and attorneys in other states that want to apply for CLE credit as needed can do so by following the instructions in the program guide. At this point, I'd like to introduce my partner and co-practice leader of the Securities Enforcement Group here at Morgan Lewis, Jeff Boujoukos. My colleagues and I at Morgan Lewis are delighted that Jeff rejoined our firm in April of this year after spending 10 years with the SEC's Enforcement Division. Jeff most recently served as the director of the Philadelphia Regional Office, where he led a staff of approximately 160 attorneys, accountants, investigators, and compliance examiners with responsibility for the Mid-Atlantic region, which comprises 5 states and the District of Columbia. For a program that focuses on regional enforcement and regional office initiatives, I can't think of a better person to moderate today's panel than Jeff. Jeff, at this point, I'll turn it over to you to introduce your fellow panelists.
Tim, thanks so much for that, and Jane also for the introductions. Thank you for the Historical Society for putting this together. Regional directors play a vital role in the success of the SEC, and I've had the benefit of working under 2 superb directors in Dan Hawk and Sharon Binger. I'd like to thank Danielle Novelli and Ben Indek for helping on the materials that were part of this CLE aspect of the program. And it was interesting when we went back and we looked at what this program would cover, looked at the last statement about the role of regions found in the restructuring and the CFR in 2007, and there was a quote in there that I think is apt for the outset of this program. The purpose of the regional office is to quote, facilitate cooperation with state and federal regulators, law enforcement agencies, and consumer groups at the local level to better protect investors no matter where they live or with whom they invest. And that local presence, I think, is going to be an overriding theme to today's program. There have been regions since 1935. So there's a long history of regional offices at the SEC. And we're lucky today to have 3 people on our panel who have been right in the middle of the regional office structure for their careers at the SEC and have played a vital role in promoting regional offices and have done just wonderful things at the regional level. Unfortunately, Michelle Lane, who was going to be our 4th panelist, has been called away and can't attend today's roundtable, which is unfortunate because we're going to miss her insights. But luckily, we have Richard Best, who is the equivalent of 3 regional directors. So we can more than make up for that today. Brief introductions on the panel, who are likely all known to you. Marc Berger. In August of this year, Marc was named Deputy Director of the SEC's Division of Enforcement, where he supervises the enforcement programs throughout the regions and in the home office. Prior to that time, Marc was the Regional Director of the New York Regional Office beginning in December of 2017. NIRO, as it's called at the SEC, is the Commission's largest regional office, and Marc led over 400 staff with oversight regarding the largest concentration of SEC-registered financial institutions in any region. Prior to coming to the SEC, Marc was Assistant United States Attorney, was an Assistant United States Attorney in the Southern District. During his 12 years there, he served as Chief of the SDNY's Securities and Commodities Task Force, where he supervised the investigation and prosecution of some of the nation's highest profile financial and investment fraud cases, including the largest crackdown on hedge fund insider trading in U.S. history. Marc was also the co-head of Ropes and Gray's securities enforcement practice immediately prior to coming to the SEC. Richard Best, in August of this year, was named the Regional Director of the New York Regional Office. Rich joined the SEC in June of 2015 as the Regional Director of the Salt Lake Office, and in 2018, he was named the Regional Director of its Atlanta office. While in Atlanta, Rich led over 160 enforcement attorneys, accountants, investigators, and compliance examiners. He also spearheaded some of the first of their kind investor outreach efforts, which hopefully he'll discuss with us today. While in Salt Lake, the office brought a number of impactful cases, including the Traffic Monsoon case, a $207 million Ponzi scheme case. Rich joined the SEC from FINRA in New York, where he was a senior director and chief counsel in its Department of Enforcement. He previously held other supervisory and investigative positions within FINRA's enforcement function. He also spent approximately 10 years as a prosecutor in the Office of the Bronx County District Attorney, where he handled and supervised high-profile public integrity and organized crime prosecutions, among others. And Kelly Gibson, in February of this year, was named the Regional Director of the Philadelphia Regional Office. Kelly joined the SEC in 2008 as a staff attorney in the Division of Enforcement in Philadelphia. When the division was reorganized in 2010, she joined the Market Abuse Unit. In 2013, she was promoted to Assistant Regional Director and then to Associate Regional Director of the Philadelphia office in 2017. In her time at the Commission, Kelly has investigated and supervised a number of significant cases, including the Newswire hacking case, the SEC action arising out of the Deepwater Horizon oil rig explosion, a recent $350 million Ponzi scheme, and numerous important insider trading cases. Kelly's been recognized by Chairman Clayton for her support of innovation in the Philadelphia office, and before joining the staff in 2008, Kelly worked in the litigation section of Ballard Spahr in Philadelphia. So we have a fantastic panel today, and the hope is that we're going to get behind some of the things that maybe aren't known about the operations of regional offices. And so with that, I'm going to turn to the panel, and I'm going to pose the first question. And this is for Marc. Marc, the SEC was one of the first federal agencies to move to work from home to move to a work from home environment. Discuss some of the challenges that your office, NIRO, at the time faced and how those were addressed.
Sure. Well, first, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Jeff. Thanks to Jane and the Historical Society for having us today. Great to be here with you all. Before I begin, why don't I take one for the team and give the standard disclaimer to cover all of us, that the views that we express today are our own and don't necessarily represent the views of the Commission or its staff. So with that out of the way, we've been on full telework since mid-March. Challenges. I think the biggest challenge, frankly, is that we miss one another. I think it's quite common in any business organization. Your coworkers, or at least a subset of your coworkers, become your closest friends. And at our agency, regardless of what regional office you're in, that couldn't be more true. And I'm sure Kelly and Rich and all the other regional directors would agree with me. And so, much of our professional identity, our comfort zone, and our overall sort of happiness derives from our work and our interaction with each other. That's been taken from us. So, that's a challenge, but for good reason, of course. But that's a challenge, probably not so unique to our organization. But that said, let me tell you sort of what we're doing and how we're doing it. And, this is true in Nairo, and I think it's probably, true throughout the regions as well. Folks are continuing to do the work they love to do. In enforcement, we've continued to bring actions. During the time of telework, between mid-March and the end of the fiscal year overall, we brought more than 490 actions. We've had to advance our investigations. We've had to open up new investigations. From mid-March to the end of the fiscal year, we opened up 640 new matters, which is a 7% increase over the same period of time last year. And about 150 of those matters related to the coronavirus. And so, we've managed to conduct virtually, I think, all the core elements of our work under this, telework posture. We triage tips, complaints, and referrals. We're requesting and reviewing documents. We're taking testimony, interviewing witnesses by video, Wells meetings and conference calls by video, negotiating settlements, and ultimately, recommending actions and settlements to the commission. So, enforcement, I think, remains strong. It remains strong in New York and throughout. In terms of sort of the practical effect of the pandemic, I'd say that we're leveraging technology-driven ways to execute on our mission, just like everyone else is right now. Some of our logistics have, required adaptation, but the focus really is on figuring out what we need to do to move aspects of our investigation forward. And so I think, like many firms and like many organizations, COVID has, this sort of COVID environment has made us take a fresh look at, whether we need to make changes to our traditional approach. And we've modified some approaches to meet new challenges. I think, the game plan has been to do more streamlined, targeted, accelerated investigations that take a more of a strategic approach in how we balance our investigative priorities up against, the practical reality of trying to reduce, unnecessary burdens in responding to our requests in this environment. And, so just two areas I'll touch on very briefly that come to mind: document productions and sort of witness testimony. With respect to document productions, where possible, we're making targeted requests to focus on, more discrete time periods or more discrete subject matter or a narrower sort of span or group of custodians. We're trying to do proffers more at an earlier stage to triage and narrow down document requests. And so what do I mean by that? We may have the company proffer on an internal process issue like quarter end closing process and who's involved in that, even before we get documents, to help us understand, how we can limit document requests and testimony. So that's document requests. With respect to testimony, I'll just hit on briefly. Look, we're conducting remote testimony and interviews by video conference. We're going to continue to do that in our environment. It's actually required us all to get, pretty good with, technology and plan out in advance more. And it's really impressive, I have to say, to see how quickly the staff and the defense bar has gotten comfortable with video testimony format. The technology, as many of you know, allows us to show documents on screen and highlight certain portions, allows counsel to take breaks and confer privately on a separate line. That said, challenges, sometimes document intensive cases can be more challenging to do this way, but we're working through those challenges. I think in the vast majority of cases, these events, these sort of video testimonies have gone pretty seamlessly. But, we're mindful that there could be instances where someone chooses not to sit for remote testimony. These have been sort of outlier cases. If we've determined that there isn't an alternative way to obtain information from the witness, we're going to make a decision to whether we can move forward on the record that we have, including making a decision, on whether to trigger the Wells process, even in the absence of testimony. And just sort of one final point, to close that off, from our perspective, arguments in a Wells process, obviously can't be a substitute for, on the record testimony. But, we're mindful of risks in moving forward, without the benefit of testimony. We're going to have to weigh that against the risk of sort of the totality of the evidentiary record, as we have it. So, that's probably broader than NIRO, but I think it probably pertains to the other regional offices and the home office as well, Jeff.
Thanks, Mark. That was really insightful. Kelly, I want to throw over to you a question. When COVID hit and the SEC went remote, one of the first questions that people were asking from the defense side was, is this going to lead to a slowdown? How is the SEC going to do this? Is this going to be a huge impediment? What was your reaction with the work from home environment, and how did the Philadelphia office deal with that change in environment?
Thanks, Jeff, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks also for having me. I think it's all of the things that Mark just said. I think I was initially skeptical that it would run as smoothly as it did. I think that we transitioned to all telework pretty seamlessly on both the OC and enforcement side. In OC, we had to quickly shift gears and we moved to doing all correspondence exams, which wasn't too much of a struggle because we have traditionally done a lot of document exchange and communication with the registrants electronically anyway. But we did, across, not just in Philadelphia, but across the regions, we did hundreds of outreach calls to registrants to discuss their business continuity planning and to see how they were dealing with, all of their staff working remotely. Were they encountering any issues with regard to possible redemption requests or IT issues or mail issues or cyber related incidents? And we gave extra time to registrants to respond to a lot of our requests. That said, I think we worked really closely with registrants on the exam side. We worked very closely with opposing counsel on the enforcement side to keep things moving along. And I think that everyone was kind of dealing with the same issues. And we were able to keep pace on both sides of the house. In our office and other offices, I know, felt the same way. I think while we had some obstacles, like Mark discussed, I mean, for the most part, I was really impressed with the way that staff kept up with everything, and that we weren't met with a lot of resistance from counsel or from firms with keeping things moving forward. And then from an office perspective, we did a lot of things to try to keep staff engaged. We had a lot of morale boosting activities that we did so that when work felt like it was a lot and the burdens of shifting with, home life, we did all kinds of things. I think in all the regions, the regional directors held all hands meetings every week to talk to the staff about any concerns they might be having and address any issues that were coming up with regard to, whether we were allowed to go into the office to do different tasks and depositions and things like that. We did virtual biweekly happy hours, and we did, pictures of the week where staff could submit a picture based on the theme. We did, all different kinds of pet parades and SEC cookbooks and trivia. We did some Ask the SOs Anything. So we really tried to keep morale up as much as we could so that people wouldn't feel discouraged doing their work in this environment. And I think at the end of the day, we did a really good job and came out where we hoped to be.
Thanks, Kelly. And I think we've all been experiencing those kinds of morale issues and confronting them. Rich, both Kelly and Mark have intimated about talking with each other and the regional directors really maybe trading ideas and things like that. And without revealing too much secret special sauce, how much do you all talk with each other and share ideas and talk about things that are going on in the regional offices?
Thanks, Jeff. And I also want to say thank you to the Historical Society for inviting us to participate in this. I think it's a great discussion and a great opportunity for people to hear what happens in individual regional offices and us collectively. First, let me say that the regional directors, we all have a great relationship. I heard about the relationship before I joined the commission, and it was confirmed once I started in Salt Lake City. We are in regular communication with each other. We have regularly scheduled calls. I'll talk about that just a little bit more in a little while. When we talk about what's going on in our offices and figure out ways to address issues in a consistent way. During the mandatory telework environment, we've also adapted to some of the challenges and discussed them more frequently than we did beforehand. Just to kind of break it out into what I'll call national calls and meetings, and then regional calls and meetings. So there are national calls on the enforcement side and on the exam side that may involve not only the regional directors, but so some of the associates also. And I think that what that does for us in the regions is we're not in the home office, so we get a chance to hear what's happening across the commission in the respective programs. And those calls are very regularly. So we will also have once a month a call with all of the regional directors where we'll have an opportunity to really talk amongst ourselves about what we're seeing, some questions that we may have. And for me, when I was a new regional director in Salt Lake, it was a great opportunity to hear some of the interesting and innovative things that some of the regions were doing. What we also do, which I also found to be something that people may find interesting, is we will email back and forth. So we not only have the calls, but we'll also have email communications if a particular issue comes up, or if just someone has a one-off question. One thing that happened during the crisis is those communications, whether it's by email or the meetings, they increased to ensure that whatever ideas a particular region may have come up with to deal with what may be a regional issue, but could also be potentially a national issue, we were able to communicate those ideas. Kelly talked about some of the things that her office did to address morale. It was a very difficult period, especially in the spring and in some parts of the country during the summer. So sharing some of those ideas about what a particular region was doing to increase morale and to just stay in communication with people who we may not have seen for 2, 3, 4, 5 months. It was tremendously helpful to hear from the other regions what they were doing. But there was another part to it. So when the crisis happened, we also needed to address operational issues and other questions that may come up. So in some instances, whether it's Stephanie or now Marc or Pete or Pete Driscoll or even the chairman may join one of our calls to talk about to hear how things are doing, or just to answer some of our questions. And then in some instances, others may join to answer questions such as folks from the human resources, from the chief operating officers, or one other area that we did see, and we got a lot of support, was for our Office of Minority and Women Inclusion. So the message is that the regional offices and the regional directors are in constant contact, whether it's by meetings, calls, or emails, and we're striving to take the best ideas and bring them into our region.
Thanks, Rich. I'm going to transition a bit here to some practical questions that I think you all could provide insight on with regard to how programs are run at the regional level. So, Kelly, I'm going to throw this question to you. For those who have not worked at the SEC, the role of the regional offices in the enforcement program oftentimes does not appear fully transparent. At least that's what I hear. Tell us one thing about how the regions influence enforcement that might be interesting or surprising to the people on the conference.
Sure. So I think a lot of people might not realize that some of the initiatives that you hear about that Steph or Marc might announce and that you hear in your practice are actually originated in the regions. And so in the regions, the staff really has very close contact with the OC staff, as well as local U.S. attorneys' offices and FBI agents who might be tuned into frauds or different type of conduct that that maybe they don't have a window into in the home office. And so oftentimes staff in the regions will be the ones to come up with an idea, and they'll come up with an idea to drive this initiative, and it will roll out across the regions. And so I think that the regions play a really important part in identifying potential areas to pursue or different outreach events, and all of that happens on a across the agency level often starts in the regions. I think I'll just quickly add another thing that is maybe not always known, but like decisions on timing and when and on what to devote resources, that's also often region driven. It often depends on the different specifics of the region. And so it's not always something that comes from the home office, but it's more based on local issues.
Thanks, Kelly. Rich, so you're now on your third office, walking in and having to look at an enforcement program and think about efficiency, moving cases. Can you talk a little bit about how, from your perspective, what makes a good enforcement program, an efficient enforcement program at the regional level, and how little or how great the regional director's influence can be over that program?
Sure. One of the things that secrets that I would tell folks about having a good and efficient regional enforcement program is one thing: just have a great team. It is something that I was fortunate to have in Salt Lake, in Atlanta, and as I have now spent about coming up on 2 months soon in Nairo in New York, I'm convinced that I'm the luckiest of the regional directors because I've hit 3 home runs and have 3 great teams. And what I mean by that is that starting with the associates, if we have good associates, they are, for the most part, going to be much closer to the enforcement program than the regional director, who is looking at the 3 legs of the stool: enforcement, examinations, and operations. So having that great associate or associates, depending on the size of the office, is critical. The next level and the next area that I think is really important is the assistant regional directors, who are going to be much closer to the cases and can actually move the cases and make strong recommendations to the associate regional directors and to myself about cases that maybe we should bring the case faster and maybe not bring certain claims, or close certain cases because it's just not the type of case that we should bring based upon our resources. What I would also say is just having regular meetings and regular discussions with the staff, the assistant regional directors, the associate regional directors, to find out where the cases are, where I can assist, or where the associates can assist to help move the case, help advance it, and not necessarily use a resource or not use a resource effectively. We can't bring every case, so making sure that we're focused on national priorities and regional risk areas. What I have seen across the country is, of course, we have national priorities, but when you look in particular regions, each region will have its own specific risk areas, and knowing what those risk areas are and how you plan to address them is also important. Next, I would say, is technology, and effectively using technology and other groups within the commission to help with some of the work. If we internalize all of the work that needs to get done and not use the available technology, then that means that that resource, that excellent team member, that excellent staff member may be working on something that could be better done with technology or with another group, and can't work on additional matters. So what do I mean by that? Well, enforcement lit support and data analytics experts are excellent resources to help us to effectively and efficiently move cases. The Division of Economic and Risk Analysis is a group of experts, a lot of them PhDs, who can help with everything from disgorgement analysis, corporate benefit analysis, and otherwise. And on the other side of the house, on the examination side of the house, assessing risk. We can do a lot of that. Doesn't matter which office it is internally, but there are people on the examination side who specialize in looking at risk. So leveraging those resources means that a lot of that work doesn't necessarily have to happen at the regional level. What do I mean by that? Well, there's the Office of Risk and Strategy within OC. And then there's a group that I am very happy that many of them are located in the New York regional office, which is the Quantitative Analytics Unit. If Pete Driscoll were on this call, he would say those are his quants. So the quants are there, and that's a resource that we could use to leverage some of the analysis that the OC team has to do. And then when I went to Salt Lake, I was fortunate to have the home of the examinations group's risk analysis and examinations group, or the RAY team. The RAY team does large analysis of data to potentially do exams or just make referrals to exam teams across the country. So those are just some ways that we can either work with teams, manage teams to be more efficient, or use data or other groups to be more efficient in the region.
Thanks, Rich. I'm going to switch gears again and talk about something that I think comes up often at the regional level. Maybe not so often, but it's certainly something that's considered by people in the defense bar, and I think your insight on this would be helpful. At times, defense counsel or their clients will consider elevating an enforcement matter above the regional office level to the home office. What advice, if any, do you have for counsel who are considering that approach? And Marc, I think you're probably uniquely situated to answer this question. And while I'm sure everybody in NIRO thinks that your move into the deputy director role was a demotion, maybe you can give us some insight on how to make those decisions effectively when you're on the defense side.
So I'll do that. I do want to echo Rich's point from the previous question about, quality of your team on enforcement cases. And I do feel blessed in what I stepped into a few years ago in New York. And I feel like that's made all the difference. Strong associates, managers, really, and great staff. That's been a real benefit. So the question's a difficult one, when to sort of raise and what to raise. So I think in thinking back on it, it's actually pretty rare from my seat when I was regional director in New York that someone elevated an enforcement matter to me sort of prior to the end stage of an investigation, a decision-making stage. So I think that probably gives you a window into how few matters would seek to then get raised beyond that, either with myself now or with, Director Avakian. I think the lion's share of matters early or mid stage of course, they get dealt with, the team and the assistant director. And on occasion, the associate director, I think, will get involved as well. Now, your question is what advice, if any, I think you said, do I have? I'm not going to take the cop out and say I don't have any. But let me give it a shot. And I'm not sure this is groundbreaking. But to give you a sense, all the meetings that I've had since I took this post in late August have been, I think, either Wells meetings or essentially at a charging stage. And that's really after the investigative team has an opportunity to develop a record, which I think is important for them to, have that opportunity. And so I think, the end stage meeting is fairly standard. And so while I won't use the word never, I think it would have to be a pretty unique sort of set of facts or an issue of sort of programmatic policy for me now to engage at an earlier stage. And so, on the advice, I guess I would say, I think, folks may want to be pretty thoughtful and judicious in those asks, because, I do feel that, even some of the non-standard sort of less routine investigative sort of controversial matters, let's call them, where people are not agreeing or want something they're not getting, or, I think those are, typically better handled, more effectively handled by, if you need to go up the ranks, associate directors or, my co-panelists here, who typically will be closer to the investigative record. So that's probably I think the best I can do with that.
And let me ask a follow-up, and you can either elect not to answer or answer, but obviously there's no requirement of exhaustion, technical exhaustion of other remedies. But if you're sitting in your seat now, what are your expectations with regard to discussions prior to it getting to you? I mean, would you expect what would be your hope? And obviously not one size fits all, but what would be your hope in that regard?
No, my hope is that, first, the council tries to work with the team and up through the appropriate levels. I think, again, there's good reason for that. They're the most familiar, and I can't be dealing with all of the requests, and so there's an efficiency to it as well. But in the first instance, those are the folks that I think should have the opportunity to respond and be thoughtful and be reasonable in considering your requests. And so, yes, there's no sort of there's no statutory exhaust all your remedies, but it would be a really hard set of facts for me to imagine, having not gone through and met with, the regional director, the associate director before, myself engaging.
Thanks, Mark. Kelly, oftentimes council, particularly in these times of COVID, are thinking about making presentations with regard to enforcement investigations early in the investigation. So after producing documents or in other circumstances, what have you seen in your experience that works and doesn't work in that regard?
So I think, we obviously welcome early discussions with council. I think it can be very beneficial to both sides. I think it helps us frame the potential issues for counsel, and then he or she can take that information back to his or her client and set expectations. I think in terms of a meeting or presentation, again, we welcome that kind of dialogue with counsel. I think what we've seen, the most productive meetings are usually meetings not where counsel's going to come and talk for an hour and say, here's why you shouldn't charge my client, and I'm going to bill the client all this money to do this hour-long presentation that doesn't really get us anywhere and isn't productive. I think the better option is to come and meet with us and present when you're at a point where you can say, okay, we've produced documents, and let us help narrow the focus. Let us help put context around some of what you're seeing, So, to hone in on specific witnesses or issues. And so, a PowerPoint can be helpful, or binders can be helpful, anything like that. But again, where it's more constructive and it's to help give context to documents, flesh out some issues. Maybe there's a dispute as to facts or evidence that council can help us with. And I think that anytime you can help lessen the burden, especially during these times right now where we're always looking to be more efficient, I think we're going to welcome that.
So Mark, I want to follow up with you, in your role now, supervising the enforcement programs at the regional level. What do you do to interact with the regional offices with regard to the enforcement program?
So that's an easier question than the last. I'll first say that, look, interacting with teams across the country and in the home office, that's really been the most fun part of this job. They are, to give you a sense, they're mostly investigation-driven meetings, I think, to discuss status of investigations, charging decisions, settlement parameters, things like that. On litigations, meeting with litigation teams if they're at critical decision points in their litigation. There haven't been so many trials. We had one trial during the pandemic, a bench trial, remote. But I imagine more will be scheduled out over the next few months. So look, and why do I say it's fun? For me, as a new deputy director, it's been a great way for me to both get into the flow of investigations, but also to meet a lot of the great staff we have in the regions. And I was actually thinking about this the other day. Had we been in the office, many of the meetings that I'm talking about, sort of these investigation or litigation type meetings, they would have likely been by phone only, conference call. And so here I at least get to see the people that I may not have otherwise seen, albeit, by video. So I think that sort of on the work front, one other big way I've been interacting with the regions is through town halls and office visits. In an ideal world, we'd visit the offices in person, but Stephanie and I have set up several hour blocks with each of the regions, which has really been a wonderful way for me to get to know the staff and for both of us to answer any questions that they have, along the lines that Rich was saying earlier in the regional town halls. We're doing those as well within the regions. And I guess the one downside is that through only virtual visits, I do miss out on local favorites, and this will be near and dear to you, Jeff, cheesesteaks, when Kelly hosted, one of our visits to Philadelphia last week or the week before. So there are some downsides, but look, there's a lot of upside.
So Rich, just to change speeds here for a second away from cheesesteaks, which is making me hungry now. We actually got a question from the audience. You had mentioned earlier regional risk areas in discussing kind of how you go about moving forward in the enforcement program, and maybe you could take a moment to talk about what role the regions play in OC's yearly examination priorities and risk alerts, which OC I think over the last 4 or 5 years has done a great job of pushing out to the registrant community.
Sure. First, all regional offices participate to some degree in the process of selecting priorities, and that begins months in advance of when you actually see those priorities come out. The ideas, they come both top down and bottom up. So the National Exam Program is collecting ideas from the regions, and there's a big meeting at some point in the year to discuss what those priorities should be. But some of the best ideas I've found come from the examiners. The various regions are developing, sharing ideas for consideration to priorities during the development process, but there are times when a regional office may have done some exam on a particular issue or in a local initiative, or they've seen something a few times in that part of the country, and they'll share that idea, and that may funnel up into the consideration of the priorities for OC as a whole. So in some instances, it's that what appears to be a one-off initially, which can become something that is added into the national program. Now, the experiences one office to another can differ on what the way that information is funneled up and the way that it happens. What I've seen is that in certain offices, they will come together and sit down and talk about what the risks are in a particular area. In other offices, they may have committees to do the same type of thing. One other area and one other way to kind of address that question that you had about risk is that at the regional level, there's also another set of relationships that are happening that may factor into a region's determination of risk. Because in the region, there may be a number of states that a particular region is dealing with or has jurisdiction over. And each one of those states will have some variation in it, and it differs according to the state of what the securities regulator is called. But each region will have some communication with those state regulators, those state securities regulators, and they can start to gather information about what those regulators are seeing. And based upon what those regulators are seeing, in addition to what the exam teams are seeing, that can become a factor in determining what the priorities are for the region and potentially nationally. Now, I will throw in one additional factor, and that is the local SROs in the region. For example, FINRA may have a district office in a region, and that relationship and what we're hearing from our partner regulators can become part of what we factor in developing regional initiatives that can ultimately become national priorities.
Thanks, Rich, and that's a good segue into some, I won't call it lightning round, but but maybe it can be somewhat lightning round. As I said at the outset, there is a statement about the justification for regional offices and the regional office structure as the SEC now has it with its 11 regions. And Kelly, maybe you could talk for a second about industry outreach, which I think goes along with what Rich was just talking about. How much outreach to registrants do the regional offices do? Is it a priority? And what's the goal of that kind of outreach?
So I think that the regional office structure plays a really important role when it comes to outreach to registrants. It's something that we all prioritize in our regions. So in addition to periodic exams that we do, which is really helpful to our exam staff to kind of understand the structure of the business and potential risks that the registrant might face. Over the years, we've developed these working relationships between our exam staff and people at these firms so that when an issue arises, they know who to call. But we also host periodic compliance outreach events where we focus our efforts on CCOs in the area, and we let them know what it's like to be subject to an exam, what they can expect, what potential issues often come up in these kind of exams. And that's a good way for them to have face-to-face interaction with our examiners outside of the traditional exam context. And so again, they know that they can reach out to us if they have issues or specific things that they want to discuss about their business. And as we mentioned at the outset when we talked about the pandemic, outreach to our registrants was one of the first things that we put in place when we went into quarantine mode. And I think it was really well received by the registrants. It was just a way that, we're looking always to be engaged with them and to let them know that, we're a resource for them if they have any issues that come up. So it's a great way that we develop these relationships throughout the industry.
And just to follow up on that, Kelly, from an OC perspective, in Philadelphia and elsewhere, do you try to send the same examiners to the same registrants where possible?
We do. And again, that's so that they can develop these relationships. And we find, it's obviously much more efficient and productive to have an examiner who really understands your business to go back and to be the point person for those registrants. And so where we can, there's an institutional knowledge that examiner builds up, and also the rapport that they develop with the people at the firm. So where we can, we definitely try and keep the same people doing those exams.
And Marc, we've talked several times during the presentation today, or the roundtable today. We've talked about innovation, and I think it's come up for each of you in different aspects. Talk a little bit about innovation at the regional level, and specifically, maybe you could focus on the emergency risk examination team that I believe originated out of NIRO, and you were instrumental in creating.
Yeah, so it's the EERT, which is the catchy acronym for this team. It's a national team. The leader of the team sits in NIRO, actually. And I think sort of the thought process there is that look, recent events demonstrate that whether it's market risk or operational risk, those things can emerge pretty suddenly. And so this is the thought behind this team. And it's a credit to Pete Driscoll, the chairman, a lot of good minds sort of behind this. It's really an overall effort to increase our ability to react quickly and bring various resources to bear to these situations that could really have a systemic impact, or that place investor assets at risk. So the types of things I'm thinking about are like exchange outages, liquidity events, cybersecurity, issues or concerns. And so this is a group that, through examinations and other firm engagement and monitoring activities, will ensure that firms are better prepared to address these exigent threats and these types of emergent risks. So it'll be a team of specialized examiners, experts, accountants, quantitative analysts that will engage with firms. I think practically day to day, picking up on something that Kelly just said, they're going to work closely with OC staff around the country in the regions, right, to provide expertise and support in response to significant market events. And I think by working alongside those regional exam teams, this group can draw from that regional experience and possibly, as Kelly mentioned, familiarity with registrants in the regions that have likely been examined before. And so I think the thought behind this national team is to sort of combine forces and bring expertise to particular functions.
Thanks, Marc. Kelly, we got a follow-up question on one of the things we were just talking about that I want to throw to you for a second. What would you recommend if a registrant wanted to try to build a relationship? Do the regions meet with registrants? Do they talk to them on the phone? Maybe you can explain some experience you have there.
Both. So obviously right now we can't meet with anyone in person. In normal times, we've definitely had those meetings and phone calls pretty regularly. So I think it's a great idea to have registrants reach out to us and be proactive in that regard. We're happy to meet with people at the firm. We've done that. We do it regularly. And like I said, right now we have some constraints as to how that can happen, but it's certainly something that we're still doing and that, we can do either in a virtual meeting format or a phone call.
And would you recommend that a registrant reach out to the associate over examinations, to you directly? Logistically, what would you recommend in that regard?
I think probably the place to start would be the associate over examinations in Philadelphia. That's Joy Thompson, but every office has an associate who oversees the exam program, and that would be the person to contact.
Great, thanks. Rich, I want to throw a question to you, which when I was a regional director myself, created a tremendous amount of jealousy in Philadelphia. your investor outreach in Atlanta and the Atlanta office's work was just phenomenal. And I remember the Investing in America program that you all put on, which was the first of its kind, where 5 commissioners actually came to Atlanta and spoke at Georgia State, I believe. Could you just discuss the importance of outreach at the regional level and what the commission's general attitude is with regard to that?
A commissioner in Chairman Clayton who is such a proponent of outreach. For me personally, whether it's been Atlanta, New York, or Salt Lake, outreach is critical, since when exam is involved or enforcement is involved, at that point, investors in many instances have already handed over their money, and we are now trying to fix a wrong. Outreach gives us an opportunity to be proactive and to give investors the information that they need to make the right decisions before they actually hand over their savings to anyone. So if we talk about the event in June of 2018, you're right, that was a historic event. It was the first time in recent memory that all 5 commissioners have come into any city and met with citizens. So we were fortunate to hold it at Georgia State University Law School, and all 5 commissioners engaged in a town hall, and then broke out into individual sessions to talk about different areas, including digital cyber and digital currency, investing, entrepreneurship, and raising capital, avoiding fraud. So there were different areas. What was also an interesting historical note is that there is a Sunshine Act notice, a publicly available Sunshine Act notice, that would show that there was a closed commission meeting held in Atlanta, which is the first time something like that has happened, again, in recent memory. The chairman also did that morning, so there was actually 3 events. He sat down and met with, he and Lori Schock and others, met with a small number of investors here personally about their experiences in investing and things that the commission could do. And what we have done, whether it's been in Salt Lake or Atlanta and now New York, is to continue the chairman's interest in meeting with investors, talking with investors, and providing investors with the tools that they need to make informed decisions.
Thanks, Rich. Kelly, oftentimes regional offices will have, I call them pet projects for outreach that maybe don't get seen nationwide. Can you talk about the work of the Philadelphia office in those types of areas, and from your perspective, what that brings both to the community and to the office?
So we do a lot of outreach in Philadelphia. It's a huge focus of ours, just like Rich said, in many of the regions, all the regions. And so we focus a lot of outreach events around high schools that people might not see, both geared towards teachers and students. So we do a lot of outreach to them about financial literacy and retirement savings. We also do a lot of outreach to seniors and to the military. And, really important to reach some of these underserved groups. We also try to focus on, people who might be targets of things like affinity fraud, so religious organizations. We do a ton of work behind the scenes to really get the word out there for the community so that they know that we're out there, they know who to call. We work with state regulators, and so if something's not appropriate for us, we can tell them who to call at the state regulators. And we also do a ton of outreach with our local FBI and U.S. attorney's offices to try to get the message out there about possible fraud that they might be seeing and that we're seeing together. So while not always apparent to everyone, we do a lot of work in those different areas, among many others. But it's something that we're continually trying to refine and expand as we go forward. And I think that during this time, while it's very strange that we can't go out and do these events in person, I think we found that it's actually more of an opportunity to reach larger groups of people. We do teletown halls. Sometimes we partner with the AARP where we can reach thousands of seniors. And so it's really been a great opportunity. And as we go forward, we figure out how to make these things work from a logistical perspective, and it gets easier every time. And so I think it's something you're going to see more of us, more of doing.
And the staff what effect does it have on the staff? For begrudging, enthusiastic? Where does it fall?
I think people are pretty enthusiastic. I mean, I can speak for Philadelphia. We get a ton of volunteers, some who are more willing than others to actually be the face of the outreach program. Some just want to work behind the scenes. But I think it's a great morale booster. I think it's a way for people to do something that really matters and that feels good and it's meaningful. That's a little bit different from their everyday work. So it's been really good. We've been lucky in that regard.
Marc, another aspect of the regional director's job and the regional offices is interaction with United States attorneys' offices within their regions. And, again, you're uniquely positioned, having been on both sides of this, to discuss what those relationships are like, and from your perspective, what's important at the regional level to pay attention to with regard to those relationships.
Yeah, so many of our most important cases are conducted in parallel with the very folks that Kelly just mentioned. We do outreach with, right? Criminal prosecutors, state, federal regulators, and by the way, on that outreach from a morale perspective, totally agree. It is. And many of us on this panel have done it. It is one of the most fulfilling things that you can do. And so it really is a morale booster, and people do feel sense of accomplishment. And it is very different from what they do on a day-to-day. I think that's why it's so catchy to do. And so, just on to your question on the criminal side, the collaboration between, our office and the criminal authorities, it's really, I think, a critical component to our enforcement program. Particularly in certain types of cases, we have remedies and relief that we're able to obtain, and those are significant. But often civil sanctions alone are often inadequate to put a stop to some behavior and to effectively deter some people. And so I think that's especially true with recidivists, microcap fraudsters, insider trading to some extent, Ponzi schemers. And so, that criminal sort of hammer, as well as, the criminal tools that are used when in these parallel investigations that we don't have, are often effective means to sort of penetrate these, well-concealed schemes. And so having regional relationships where the staff of the SEC and the criminal authorities have a good understanding how one another works. I think that's very helpful and really necessary to working these types of cases in parallel. And I think a strong relationship along those lines not only makes the investigative process function better, but it actually allows for more effective referrals earlier on, and those referrals go both ways. And I think, that is a result we all want, which permits for greater investor protection. So I think, those relationships, with the criminal authorities at the regional level are pretty critical.
And just kind of segueing to litigation in general, people on the people attending may not understand that there's something fairly unique at the SEC, which is the trial unit is also, each regional office has its own trial unit that's responsible for litigation, both in its region, and if there are cases that are brought outside of the region by the region, those trial attorneys will handle those cases also. What do you think the benefits of having those dedicated trial units in each regional office are?
Yeah, so I can speak from New York, which I think offers a good perspective on this. You know, many of the, well, I think most of, shouldn't say most, a good proportion of cases in New York are filed in the Southern District of New York. We often routinely would file in the Eastern District or the District of New Jersey as well. Those make sense to be the top three local courts. But when you, to your question, you know, regional trial attorneys around the country, they don't necessarily file in their courts. Many of those cases actually get filed in the Southern District of New York, where there's, you know, a natural and strong venue component, you know, to Manhattan in financial fraud cases, you know, for obvious reasons. I think that, you know, as a result, you know, there's a fairly well-established body of securities case law that's actually developed in the Second Circuit, which I think is valuable for us, you know, to on the front end of our, you know, matters as we're assessing the strength or the weakness of, you know, one particular set of facts against, to be able to, you know, look at what that body of law looks like. But, you know, beyond that, with respect to the regions, having some familiarity with the district courts, their own district courts, processes or procedures, which I think, you know, to your question, you know, is typically known pretty well by the regional office trial counsel who appear most frequently in those local courthouses. You know, I think that's probably, you know, good knowledge for those folks to have.
And we're getting close to the end here, and I wanted to spring on all of you one last question that I did not tell you about in advance. You know, starting with Marc. Marc, what was your favorite part about being a regional director?
The favorite part is probably one that I miss most now, which is what I started out with, which is, and this is an easy one to go first on, but really getting to know the people in the New York office and getting to know those people who are experts in so many different disciplines. And we've covered those, right? From the exam side to the enforcement side. And New York is unique in that there are, you know, well over 100 employees who sit in the New York office who actually report to the home office in various different functions. They're part of different divisions and offices. They're the, you know, the economists that Rich talked about before. They're the quants. And so just having that expertise and seeing those people day to day was, you know, beyond rewarding.
Rich, I'll throw it to you. Favorite part about being a regional director?
I don't want to mimic what Marc just said, but I'm going to tell you, coming into New York now, almost 2 months, the people and talking with the people, one of the things that I have been challenged to do, which I hope I'm executing successfully, is to get to know those people in a virtual environment. One thing that I would think most, if not all, regional directors do is just walk around the office and pop into people's offices and talk with them about their exams, their investigations. And part of those conversations are getting to know the person, just not only in terms of their substance, but what's interesting to them and what are their strengths. And that we can't do now. So in its place, I hold a lot of virtual meetings with individual assistant director groups. So those are the first line supervisory groups within the commission. And that's an opportunity for me to substitute those times that I would walk around the building and talk to people and hear their ideas and hear their suggestions for the office.
And Kelly, I know that you would agree with all those things, but what makes you the most excited, or what's your favorite part about being a regional director?
So obviously it's been very challenging considering I just took over this job about 2 weeks, I guess, before we went into mandatory telework. So like Rich in New York, I haven't gotten the opportunity to walk around and meet everyone. I think as an associate, I obviously got to, over enforcement, I obviously got to know the enforcement staff really well. But being a regional director now, I really enjoy getting to know the OC staff more closely. I knew some of them from working on enforcement matters with them. But now I really get a big picture view of what they do. And there are so many really brilliant and talented people in our office, and getting to know those people a little more closely has been terrific. And I think that in some ways, this environment's maybe been better because, as many people who've worked at the SEC know, the OC staff's not always in the office. They're out on the field, and so they're away or teleworking for large periods of time. You don't always get to see them face to face. And I think in this virtual environment at the SEC, we've been doing almost all of our meetings by video. And so I get to see a lot of people that maybe I wouldn't otherwise see if we were in the office. And so really getting to know them and know what they do, and then working even more closely with the operations staff to see how the trains run. It's really been eye-opening, and it's been really rewarding for me.
Well, I just want to thank all of you for doing this roundtable today. Just fantastic insights, and hopefully everybody who attended enjoyed and maybe learned something about the regional office structure or what is done at the regional offices they didn't know before they attended. But it's terrific for you all to take this time and put this into the historical record for the Historic Society in this really difficult and historic time. You all have been doing a super job in keeping the trains running, as Kelly says. And thank you so much. And again, Jane, thank you so much for allowing us to do this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
We'll end the program. Thank you.